Deputy Marshal Will Fenner rode out of Dry Willow on a bitter February morning, his badge catching the weak winter sun. The warrant in his saddlebag bore the name of Jake Snake Morrison, wanted for murder and robbery across 3 territories. The trail led south toward the Mexican border, through lands where the law grew thin and justice came at the barrel of a gun. 6 weeks later, Will found himself bleeding in a dusty border town called Esperanza. Morrison had friends, too many friends. The bullet in Will's shoulder burned like hellfire. An infection was setting in. The local doctor, a drunk who reeked of tequila, had done what he could. But Will knew he needed proper care or he'd be dead within days. That's when he first saw her. Amaya moved through the shabby boarding house like a shadow, carrying clean bandages and a basin of water. Her hands were gentle as she tended his wound, her dark eyes focused on her work. She spoke little English, and Will's Spanish was rough, but somehow they understood each other through gestures and quiet moments. "You're burning up," she said in accented English, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. "The doctor, he is—" She made a drinking motion. "I noticed," Will croaked, attempting a smile. For 3 days and nights, she nursed him through the fever, when his mind wandered in delirium. She sang soft songs in Spanish, melodies that reminded him of wind through canyon walls. When the fever broke, he found her asleep in the chair beside his bed, exhaustion etched into her bronze features. The boarding house owner, Senora Martinez, clucked her tongue when she found them that way. "That one, she has a good heart. Too good for this place." As Will recovered, he learned Amaya's story in fragments. Her mother had been Comanche, taken young and married to a Mexican rancher. When both parents died of smallpox, Amaya found herself alone at 17, working where she could to survive. The boarding house provided room and board in exchange for her labor, cooking, cleaning, tending to the occasional wounded traveler. "Why help me?" Will asked one evening as she changed his bandages. "I'm just another gringo lawman." She paused, considering her words. "My father used to say, we choose who we become by who we help. You have kind eyes, Senor Will, not like the others who passed through." Their conversations grew longer as his strength returned. Will told her about Dry Willow, about the vast sky and endless plains, about tracking outlaws through lands where civilization was just a distant promise. She shared memories of her parents, of growing up between 2 worlds, never fully belonging to either. The night before Will planned to leave, Morrison had been caught by Mexican authorities. Amaya brought him supper and lingered by the door. "I wish you safe travels," she said softly. Something in her voice made Will's chest tighten. He'd been shot before, faced down desperate men, but nothing had prepared him for the thought of never seeing her again. "Come with me," he said suddenly, the words escaping before he could stop them. Her eyes widened. "Senor Will, I know how it sounds, but these past weeks, I can't explain it." He struggled to find the right words. "In Dry Willow, I could protect you, give you a better life than this. Your people, they would not accept someone like me. Then we'll make them accept it." She shook her head sadly. "You are a good man, but you do not understand. In your world, I would be nothing. Here, at least, I am invisible." Will stood, still weak but determined. "You're wrong. You could never be nothing." He took her hands, rough from work but impossibly gentle. "I'm not asking lightly. I know what I'm saying." Tears gathered in her eyes. If I came with you, it could not be as—" She struggled for the English word. "Querida, mistress." "No," Will said firmly. "As my wife." The word hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. "There is a priest," Amaya whispered. "Father Miguel. He performs marriages for those who cannot go to the church." 3 days later, in a tiny adobe chapel lit by candles, William James Fenner and Amaya Reyes spoke vows in a mixture of English and Spanish. Father Miguel, ancient and nearly blind, blessed their union with shaking hands. The only witnesses were the painted saints on the walls and Senora Martinez, who wept into her shawl. They spent their wedding night in a small room above the boarding house. Will held his new wife with a tenderness that surprised them both, aware of her innocence, of the trust she was placing in him. When dawn came, they lay entwined, her head on his chest, his fingers tangled in her long black hair. "Are you certain?" she asked. "Once we leave, there is no returning. I've never been more certain of anything in my life." They prepared to leave that afternoon. Will had recovered enough to travel. Though slowly, he'd sent word to Dry Willow that he was returning, delayed by injury but successful in his mission. He made no mention of a wife. As they packed Amaya's few belongings, some clothes, her mother's silver cross, a small painted portrait of her parents, she suddenly gripped the edge of the bed. "Amaya?" Will rushed to her side. She looked up at him, fear and wonder warring in her eyes. I have not bled in 2 months. I thought it was the worry, the work. But now—" She placed a hand on her still flat stomach. I think I carry your child." The room seemed to spin. Will sank onto the bed beside her, his mind racing. A child, their child, in Dry Willow, where Mexican and Indian blood were viewed as stains to be scorned or scrubbed away. "This changes things," he said slowly. "You wish to leave me here?" Her voice was steady, but he saw her hands tremble. "No," he pulled her close. "Never, but we'll need to be careful, more careful than I planned." He thought quickly. "There's a cabin in the mountains above town, my uncle's old place. No one goes there in winter. You could stay there while I figure out how to tell them. Hide me away like shame. Protect you," he corrected. "Until the town is ready, until I can make them understand." She studied his face, then nodded slowly. "If you think this is best, I trust you, my husband." The word husband on her lips still seemed like a miracle. They left Esperanza as the sun began its descent. Will on his horse with Amaya riding behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist. Senora Martinez pressed a bundle of food into their hands and whispered prayers for their safety. Father Miguel blessed them one final time. As they rode north, toward the distant mountains and an uncertain future, Will felt the weight of his badge against his chest. He'd sworn to uphold the law, to protect the innocent, to serve justice. Now he carried the greatest responsibility of his life, a wife whose very existence would challenge everything Dry Willow believed, and a child who would embody their defiance of those beliefs. The trail stretched ahead, winding through desert and scrubland toward the place he'd called home. But home, Will realized, was no longer a place. It was the woman whose heartbeat he felt against his back, whose quiet breathing matched his own, whose courage humbled him with every mile. As darkness fell, they made camp in a sheltered canyon. Amaya prepared a simple meal while Will tended the horse and checked his weapons. Old habits died hard. Even on this strangest of journeys, they sat close to the fire, sharing food and water, hands touching with the casual intimacy of new love. "Tell me about the cabin," Amaya said. "It's not much. One room, a fireplace, a good well, but the views—" Will smiled. "You can see forever from up there. Mountains touching the sky, valleys full of pine and aspen. In spring, wildflowers cover the meadows. It sounds beautiful. You'll make it beautiful," he said, "just by being there." She leaned against him, and they watched the stars emerge in the vast western sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fears, but tonight they were simply Will and Amaya Fenner, bound by law and love, riding toward a future they would have to fight to claim. The coyotes called in the distance, their voices echoing off canyon walls. Will held his wife closer and felt their child's presence like a promise, fragile, precious, and worth any sacrifice that lay ahead. The cabin stood like a lonely sentinel against the mountain's face, its weathered logs gray with age and neglect. Snow still clung to the shadowed places, though April had come to the valleys below. Will helped Amaya down from the horse, noting how she swayed slightly. The altitude, the pregnancy, and 3 weeks of hard travel had taken their toll. "It needs work," he said apologetically. surveying the sagging porch and gaps between the logs. Amaya walked slowly to the door, running her hand along the rough wood. "It needs life," she corrected softly. "We will give it that." They spent the first days making the cabin habitable. Will patched the worst gaps with mud and moss, fixed the door that hung crooked on its hinges, and cleared years of debris from the fireplace. Amaya scrubbed every surface until the old wood gleamed, hung the few belongings they'd brought to make it feel like home, and coaxed the rusty pump back to life. At night, they lay together on the narrow bed Will had built from pine logs and rope, listening to the wind sing through the trees. These were the hours Amaya treasured most, when the world shrank to just the two of them, skin against skin, heartbeats synchronized in the darkness. Will would place his hand on her growing belly, marveling at the life within, while she traced the scar on his shoulder where Morrison's bullet had brought them together. "I'll come every week," Will promised as he prepared to return to Dry Willow. "Supplies, news, whatever you need. And you? What will you tell them?" "That I'm checking my uncle's property, maybe doing some hunting." He kissed her forehead. "Just for a while, until I can ease them into the truth." The loneliness hit Amaya hardest in the evenings. The cabin, which felt cozy with Will there, seemed to expand into echoing emptiness without him. She filled her days with routine, tending the small garden she'd started, gathering herbs and roots as her mother had taught her, preparing for the baby. But when darkness fell and the coyotes began their nightly chorus, she felt the weight of her isolation. Will came as promised, riding up the mountain trail every Sunday after church. He brought flour, salt pork, coffee, and precious items like needles and thread. More importantly, he brought himself, his warmth, his touch, his reassurances that this separation was temporary. One evening in May, as wildflowers painted the meadow in brilliant colors, their reunion was particularly intense. Will had been gone 10 days instead of 7, delayed by a manhunt for cattle rustlers. Amaya met him at the door, her body rounder now, her need for him written plainly on her face. They barely made it to the bed. Clothes scattered across the floor as hands reacquainted themselves with familiar territory. Will was gentle, mindful of her condition, but Amaya pulled him closer, needing the connection, the proof that she wasn't forgotten. Afterward, they lay tangled together, sweat cooling on their skin, the baby moving between them like a third heartbeat. "I hate leaving you," Will whispered against her neck. "Then stay." "You know I can't. Not yet." She turned to face him, dark eyes serious. "When?" "Will, when our child is born, when they're walking, when they ask why their father only visits on Sundays." He had no answer that would satisfy either of them. As spring turned to summer, Amaya's isolation was broken by an unexpected visitor. She was drawing water from the well when she heard horses on the trail, heart pounding. She grabbed the shotgun Will had left her and waited inside, barrel trained on the door. "Hello, the cabin?" The voice was young, uncertain. "Anyone home? My horse threw a shoe." Through the window, Amaya saw a cowboy, barely out of his teens, holding the reins of a limping mare. She kept the gun ready but opened the door a crack. "There is no one here," she said carefully, trying to minimize her accent. "You must go." The boy's eyes widened at seeing her. A pregnant woman, obviously Mexican or Indian, alone in the mountains. "Ma'am, I don't mean no trouble. Name's Tom Garrett. I work for the Box J Ranch. Just need to rest my horse. I got water. Won't bother you none." Something in his earnest face reminded Amaya of her younger brother, dead these 5 years. Against her better judgment, she lowered the gun. "You can water your horse, then go." Tom proved true to his word, tending his horse quietly, but as he prepared to leave, leading the limping mare, Amaya's conscience stirred. "Wait," she called. "You cannot walk her all the way down on those rocks. Stay the night in the barn. Leave at first light." Relief flooded his young face. "Thank you, ma'am. I'll chop wood for you, haul water, whatever you need." That evening, Amaya found herself sharing supper with the boy, who talked nervously about ranch life, carefully not asking questions about her circumstances. When Will arrived 3 days later for his weekly visit, he found Tom's horse in the barn and nearly kicked the door down in his urgency to get inside. "Amaya, are you—" He stopped short, seeing her calmly cooking while Tom split wood outside. "Your husband?" Tom asked when Will confronted him, hand on his gun. "Sorry, Marshal Fenner. She didn't mention— she said she was the caretaker." Will's jaw tightened, but Amaya stepped between them. "He is a boy who needed help, nothing more." After Tom left, promising to keep quiet about the caretaker, Will paced the cabin like a caged wolf. "It's not safe. If word gets out, what would you have me do? Turn away a child?" "He's not a child. He's a ranch hand who'll talk to other ranch hands. He thinks I'm your servant," Amaya said quietly. "Is that not what you want? For me to play a role until you find your courage?" The words stung because they held truth. Their lovemaking that night had an edge of desperation, as if they could solve their problems through touch alone. Will held her afterward, feeling the baby kick against his palm, whispering apologies and promises in equal measure. By July, Amaya could no longer hide her condition from any visitor. Will brought her fabric to make loose dresses and a letter from a midwife in a mining camp 2 valleys over, a woman who wouldn't ask questions for the right price. The summer heat made the cabin stifling, but venturing out risked exposure. The crisis came in August. Will arrived for his visit to find Amaya feverish and weak. The baby wasn't due for 6 weeks, but the strain of isolation, poor nutrition, and constant worry had taken its toll. "We're going to town," he said, already packing their things. "No." She gripped his hand weakly. "They will not help me there." "You know this?" He did know. Dr. Morrison, no relation to the outlaw, had made his feelings about treating undesirables clear on many occasions. The man would let Amaya and the baby die rather than sully his hands. Instead, Will rode hard to the mining camp, returning with Clara Bouchard, the midwife who'd seen everything in her 40 years of practice and judged nothing that paid in gold. "She needs rest, proper food, and less worry," Clara pronounced after examining Amaya. "This baby wants to come early, and that's dangerous enough without her being worn to nothing." For 2 weeks, Clara stayed at the cabin. Will claimed a family emergency to explain his absence from town, wearing out his horse traveling between Dry Willow and the mountain. Under Clara's care, Amaya grew stronger, the immediate danger passing. "You love her," Clara observed one evening, watching Will brush Amaya's hair as she dozed. "More than my life." "Then why this?" She gestured at the cabin. "Why hide her like a criminal?" Will explained about Dry Willow, about the prejudices that ran deeper than mine shafts, about his position and the impossibility of their situation. Clara snorted. "Boy, I've birthed babies for saloon girls, preachers' daughters, and everything in between. You know what I learned? Love finds a way, or it wasn't love to begin with." After Clara left, promising to return when the baby came, Will and Amaya faced the growing reality that their secret couldn't hold much longer. Her body was heavy with child now, moving carefully around the cabin they'd made into a sanctuary. One night, as September stars wheeled overhead, they sat on the porch Will had repaired, sharing the evening coolness. "I want to name him Gabriel if it's a boy," Amaya said, "after my father. And if it's a girl, Rose for my mother. Rosa." Will pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "I'll tell them soon. After the baby comes, when I can't imagine life without both of you. I'll tell them all." She smiled sadly, knowing his fear, understanding it even as it wounded her. "I dreamed last night that we lived in a white house with green shutters. Our children played in the yard, this one and others to come. No one stared, no one whispered. We were just a family." "We are a family," Will said fiercely. "Whatever else happens, we are that." As if in agreement, the baby kicked hard enough to make them both laugh. In that moment, the cabin didn't feel like a prison but a chrysalis, something temporary that held transformation. Soon, very soon, they would have to emerge and face the world, but tonight they were safe in their mountain sanctuary, suspended between what was and what might be. The first snows would come within weeks. The baby would arrive near that time, in the cold and isolation, with only Will and hopefully Clara to help. After that, everything would change. Will knew it. Amaya knew it. The secret that had bound them would either strengthen into truth or shatter everything they'd built. But that was tomorrow's fear. Tonight, they had each other, the stars, and the fierce love that had brought them to this unlikely place. It would have to be enough. The first snow came early that year, dusting the mountains like flour while the valleys still clung to autumn. Amaya moved slowly now, her body heavy with the child that seemed determined to arrive before its time. She stood at the window, watching the trail that wound up from Dry Willow, waiting for Will's familiar silhouette against the darkening sky. He was late, 3 days late. When he finally appeared, she knew something was wrong. His shoulders were set in the rigid line that meant trouble, and he dismounted with the weariness of a man carrying the world. "There's been a robbery," he said without preamble, pulling her into his arms. "The stage from Denver. 3 men dead, including Judge Whitman's nephew. The whole town is in an uproar. You must help with the investigation. I must lead it. Sheriff Collins is down with pneumonia." He held her tighter. "I'm sorry, Amaya. I don't know when I can get back." She pulled away to look at his face. "The baby, I know." His voice cracked. "Clara can't come for another week. The mining camp had a cave-in." He cupped her face in his hands. "I'll figure something out. I swear it." But they both knew the truth. When her time came, she might be alone. The investigation consumed Will for 10 days. He tracked the robbers through early snow, exchanged gunfire in a box canyon, and finally brought 2 of them back in chains. The third lay buried in a shallow grave, Will's bullet in his chest. The town celebrated their deputy's success, buying him drinks at the saloon, clapping him on the back. All Will could think about was Amaya, alone on the mountain. When he finally broke free, he rode hard through a gathering storm. The snow fell thick and heavy, turning the familiar trail treacherous. His horse stumbled twice, and Will had to walk the last mile, leading the exhausted animal through knee-deep drifts. He found Amaya collapsed by the well, bucket overturned, her dress soaked with snow and something else, blood. No. He carried her inside, her body frighteningly light despite her swollen belly. She was conscious but weak, skin pale as parchment. "The baby," she whispered. "It's coming." Will had delivered calves and foals, even helped at a birth once when no women were available. But this was Amaya. This was their child. And his hands shook as he built up the fire and heated water. "I need Clara," she gasped between contractions. "Can't leave you. We'll manage. We'll—" His voice broke. For 6 hours, Amaya labored while the storm raged outside. Will held her, coached her, prayed to a god he'd half forgotten. When the baby finally came, a girl, tiny but fierce, her first cry was the sweetest sound he'd ever heard. But Amaya was bleeding too much. Will packed clean cloths against her, wrapped the baby in his own shirt, and made the hardest decision of his life. "I'm getting help." "No." Her hand caught his weakly. "Don't leave us. You'll die without a doctor. Then I die with you here." Her eyes, though dimmed with pain, were resolute. "Please, Will, don't let me die alone." He stayed. Through the long night, he stayed, keeping the fire burning, holding their daughter to Amaya's breast to nurse, changing blood-soaked bandages. By morning, miraculously, the bleeding had slowed. Amaya slept, pale but breathing. The baby rose as she'd wanted, made small, perfect sounds against her mother's skin. 3 days later, Clara arrived on snowshoes, having heard from Tom Garrett about the pregnant woman in the mountains. "Fool man," she muttered, examining Amaya. "She nearly died." "I couldn't leave her." Clara's expression softened. "No, I suppose you couldn't." She taught Will how to care for both mother and child, then stayed another week until she was satisfied they'd survive. As Amaya recovered, Will was called back to town. The execution of the captured robbers required his presence, as did the constant demands of a town trying to prove it was civilized. He came when he could, but never enough. Each parting grew harder as Rose changed daily, her skin the color of coffee with cream, her hair dark and straight, her eyes shifting from baby blue to deep brown. In November, disaster struck from an unexpected quarter. Will arrived to find 3 horses in the barn and angry voices from the cabin. He burst through the door to find Amaya backed against the wall, holding Rose, while 3 men ransacked their few possessions. Well, said the largest, Jake Thornton, a ranch hand known for his drinking and mean streak. The high and mighty deputy's got himself a little brown plaything. Will's gun was out before the man finished speaking. Get out, now! Easy there, deputy. We're just passing through. Thought the cabin was empty till we found your, what is she, maid? Cook? Thornton's leer made Will's finger itch on the trigger. She's under my protection. That's all you need to know. Protection. One of the others snickered. Is that what they're calling it now? The confrontation ended without bloodshed, but barely. The men left, but not before Thornton called back. Wait till the good folks in town hear about this. Their precious deputy, keeping an Indian whore in the mountains. Amaya was shaking when Will reached her. They'll tell everyone. Let me handle it. But his voice lacked conviction. He knew Thornton's type, small men who grew tall on others' secrets. The argument that followed was their worst yet. Amaya wanted to leave, to run before the storm broke. Will insisted they could weather it, that he'd find a way to protect them. Protect us? Amaya's voice rose, waking the baby. Like you protected us today, like you protect us by keeping us hidden like something shameful. That's not— Yes, it is. She was crying now, months of frustration pouring out. I live like a ghost. Will, our daughter doesn't exist to the world, and you come here and play family for a few hours before running back to your real life. You are my real life. Then act like it. He pulled her close, both of them trembling. I'm scared. He admitted. I'm scared of losing my position, my ability to provide for you. I'm scared of what they might do. And I'm scared of raising our daughter to believe she's something to be hidden. That night, their lovemaking had a desperate edge. They came together as if trying to bridge the growing gap between his 2 worlds. Skin against skin, breath mingling in the cold air. They sought reassurance in the only language that had never failed them. Will kissed every inch of her, worshipped her body that had given him a daughter. Tried to pour all his love and fear and promise into touch. Afterward, as they lay entwined with Rose sleeping between them, Amaya whispered, Sometimes I think we're like the snow on the mountain, beautiful from far away, but destined to melt when the world warms up. No, Will said fiercely. We're the mountain itself, solid, permanent. But even as he said it, he could hear the spring melt beginning. The reckoning came sooner than expected. Will returned to Dry Willow to find Thornton had been busy. Whispers followed him down Main Street. Women pulled their skirts aside as he passed. In the saloon, conversations died when he entered. Sheriff Collins, recovered from his pneumonia but still weak, called Will into his office. There's talk, Will. There's always talk. This is different. Thornton's saying you got a woman up at the old Fenner place, a Mexican or Indian woman. Says there's a baby. Will kept his face carefully neutral. Thornton's a drunk and a liar. Maybe so, but Reverend Blackwood's calling for an investigation. Says it's a matter of moral turpitude. The town council's listening. Will felt the walls closing in. What do you want me to do? Collins sighed, looking older than his years. I don't rightly know, son. You're the best deputy I've had, but this town, they got ideas about how things should be. Strong ideas. That Sunday, Reverend Blackwood delivered a sermon on the dangers of temptation and the mixing of blood that went against God's plan. He never mentioned Will by name, but every eye in the congregation found him. Will sat in his usual pew, badge polished, back straight, and planned. He would bring Amaya and Rose down from the mountain, install them in the boarding house. Dare anyone to say something to his face, make it clear she was his wife, legally wed, and their daughter was legitimate. But when he reached the cabin that evening, he found Amaya packing. "We're leaving," she announced. "Tom Garrett came by. He told me what's happening in town. We won't wait for them to come with torches." "They wouldn't they?" She whirled on him, Rose crying in her arms. "Tell me truly, when they come, and they will come, will you stand in front of us? Or will you stand with them, ashamed of the Mexican woman and half-breed child you've hidden away? How can you ask that? Because I need to know. I need to know if the man I married exists, or if I've been loving a shadow who appears on Sundays and disappears with the dawn." Will crossed to her, framing her face with his hands. "I choose you. I choose Rose. I choose us. Then prove it. Come with us. Leave this place that will never accept us. Or stay and fight for our right to exist here." They stood at an impasse, love and fear warring in both their hearts. Outside, snow began to fall again, as if the mountain itself was trying to hide them from the world below. But spring would come, as it always did. The snow would melt, and with it, their fragile shelter from reality. The question was, would their love prove stronger than the prejudice waiting in the valley? Or would it, too, melt away under the harsh sun of others' judgment? In the silence, Rose stopped crying and reached for her father's badge, tiny fingers grasping at the star that had defined his life. Will looked at his daughter, at her mother, and felt the full weight of the choice before him. The badge or his family, the town's approval or his integrity, the life he'd built or the life he wanted. Tomorrow, he would have to choose. But tonight, in their cabin sanctuary, he held his family close and tried not to think about the storm gathering strength in the valley below. Christmas Eve arrived in Dry Willow with fresh snow and forced cheer. Main Street glowed with lanterns, and the Methodist Church prepared for its annual pageant. Will stood at his office window, watching families hurry past, bundled against the cold. Each happy couple, each child's laugh, twisted the knife deeper in his chest. He hadn't seen Amaya and Rose in 8 days, the longest separation since their daughter's birth. The town council had been watching him, waiting for him to slip away to the mountains and confirm their suspicions. Deputy Fenner, Mrs. Collins appeared in his doorway, the sheriff's wife holding a covered dish. "I thought you might like some supper, seeing as you're working tonight." Will accepted the food gratefully, though his stomach churned. "That's kind of you, ma'am." She lingered, clearly wanting to say more. Finally, "William, I've known you since you were a boy. Your mother would want you to be happy." "My mother's been gone 10 years. Mrs. Collins." "Yes, but she raised you right, to know the difference between what's legal and what's moral." She met his eyes meaningfully. "Sometimes they're not the same thing." After she left, Will picked at the food, his mind on the mountain. Was Amaya warm enough? Did she have enough wood? Was Rose healthy? The not knowing was agony. A commotion outside drew his attention. Thornton and his cronies were gathered near the saloon, passing a bottle and growing louder with each swig. Will's hand moved instinctively to his gun as he heard his name mentioned, followed by crude laughter. "Deputy!" Mayor Hutchins' voice cut through his dark thoughts. The portly man entered without invitation, followed by Reverend Blackwood and banker Josiah Pratt. "We need to discuss the Christmas service arrangements." Will knew this wasn't about Christmas. "Gentlemen, there's been talk," Hutchins began, settling his bulk into a chair. "Disturbing talk about activities up at the old Fenner place." "My uncle's cabin is my property," Will said evenly. "What I do there is my business, not when it reflects on the moral standing of this town." Blackwood interjected, his thin face pinched with righteousness. "We cannot have a representative of the law consorting with—" "Careful, Reverend—" Will's voice carried a warning that made Pratt step back. Hutchins raised a placating hand. "No one's making accusations. We simply feel it would be best if you attended tomorrow's Christmas service. With Mrs. Whitman. Will frowned. Mrs. Whitman. Your wife, Pratt said carefully. Legal wife. That is, the one you married 5 years ago in Denver. The room spun. Margaret and I have been separated for 3 years. The divorce was never finalized. Hutchins finished. We checked. She's willing to reconcile. For appearance's sake. Attend Christmas service together. Show a united front. And this unpleasantness can be forgotten. You want me to pretend? We want you to honor your actual marriage vows, Blackwood said severely. Not whatever heathen ceremony you may have participated in elsewhere. Will stood slowly, hand steady on his gun. Get out. Think carefully, Deputy, Hutchins warned as they filed toward the door. Your position, your future in this town, out, alone again. Will slumped in his chair. Margaret. He'd tried so hard to forget that mistake. A whirlwind courtship, a hasty marriage, and the quick realization that she'd wanted a badge, not a man. Their separation had been bitter but mutual. He'd filed for divorce, assumed it was final, but if it wasn't, God help him. If it wasn't, then Amaya wasn't legally his wife. Rose was illegitimate. Everything he'd promised them was built on sand. He rode out that night. Consequences be damned. The moon was full, turning the snow-covered trail into a silver river. His horse picked its way carefully up the mountain while Will's mind raced. He had to warn Amaya, had to figure out what to do. He found the cabin dark. No smoke from the chimney. His heart stopped. Amaya! He burst through the door to find emptiness. The bed was made, dishes clean and stacked. But dust had already begun to settle. On the table, a note in her careful handwriting. My beloved Will, I could not wait any longer. Tom Garrett brought news of your wife. I will not be the shame that destroys you. Find us when you are free. If you still wish to. Until then, know that you are loved. Always. Will sank onto the bed they'd shared, her pillow still holding the faint scent of her hair. Rose's tiny clothes hung from pegs on the wall. The cradle he'd built with his own hands sat empty by the cold fireplace. She was gone. He rode back to town like a man possessed, arriving as Christmas Day dawned. Without stopping to change or shave, he pounded on Tom Garrett's door at the boarding house. Where are they? He demanded when the young cowboy answered. Deputy Fenner, Will grabbed his shirt. Where? South. She went south. Said something about family near the border. Tom's eyes were wide with fear and sympathy. She made me promise not to tell you for 3 days. Said you'd come after her and ruin yourself. Will released him, stumbling back. South, in winter, with a 3-month-old baby. The dangers were countless. Weather, bandits, wild animals, illness. I'm sorry, Tom said quietly. She seemed so sure it was right. Will walked to the church in a daze. The Christmas service was beginning, townspeople filing in wearing their finest clothes. Margaret stood on the steps, resplendent in green velvet, her blonde hair perfectly arranged. She'd grown thinner, harder since he'd last seen her. William, she greeted him coolly. You look terrible. What are you doing here, Margaret? Saving your career, apparently. Shall we? She took his arm possessively. The service passed in a blur. Will stood when others stood, sat when they sat, but his mind was on a snowy trail heading south. Every hymn reminded him of Amaya's soft singing. Every child's voice made him think of Rose. Afterward, at the social reception, Margaret played the dutiful wife perfectly, while Will endured congratulations through gritted teeth. So good to see you together again. Mrs. Pratt simpered. Family is everything. Blackwood intoned. Now things can get back to normal. Hutchins declared, clapping Will on the shoulder. Normal. As if Will could ever accept their version of normal again. That evening, Margaret cornered him at the boarding house. The mayor's offered to pay for rooms until we can establish a proper household. Separate bedrooms, of course. I have no interest in resuming marital relations. Then why? Because I enjoy being the deputy's wife. the respect, the position. And you need me to maintain your standing." She examined her gloves. "I heard about your indiscretion. A Mexican woman? Really, William? How common?" Will's hands clenched. "Her name is Amaya. She's my wife." "No, darling. I'm your wife. She's just a mistake you made while the divorce was pending." Margaret's smile was sharp as glass. "But don't worry. We'll never speak of her again." 3 days. He gave Margaret and the town 3 days of pretense while secretly preparing. He withdrew his savings, packed supplies, and studied maps of the southern routes. On the 3rd night, while Margaret attended a ladies' auxiliary meeting, Will left a letter on the Sheriff Cullen's desk. "By the time you read this, I'll be gone. The badge is in the drawer. I've served this town faithfully for 6 years, but I cannot serve a lie. My place is with my family, my true family. Don't look for me. Will Fenner." He rode out before dawn, leaving behind everything he'd built in Dry Willow. The trail south was treacherous, but Will pushed hard, following rumors and intuition. In every settlement, he asked about a Mexican woman with a baby. Most shook their heads. Some sneered. A few, seeing something in his desperate eyes, pointed him onward. He found evidence of their passing. A woman at a trading post remembered Amaya's quiet dignity. A farmer mentioned seeing them sheltered in his barn during a storm. Always. He was days behind. The snow turned to rain as he descended toward the border. His badge was gone, but his purpose had never been clearer. He would find them. He would make things right. And if the law said Margaret was his wife, then he'd live outside the law. Because Amaya had been right about one thing. Sometimes legal and moral weren't the same. And Will Fenner had finally chosen which one mattered more. On a cold January morning, he stopped at a mission where an old priest was tending the garden. "Father, I'm looking for a woman, Mexican, traveling with a baby." The priest studied him carefully. "Many women travel these roads. My son, this one is special. She's everything." Something in Will's voice must have convinced him. There was a woman, very beautiful, very sad. She stayed here 2 nights with a baby girl, left yesterday, heading for Esperanza. Esperanza, where it all began. Will thanked the priest and rode on, hope blazing in his chest like fire. He was close now, so close he could almost feel Amaya's presence on the wind. The badge was gone, the position lost, the false wife abandoned. But Will Fenner had never felt more like the man he was meant to be. He rode toward Esperanza and the woman who'd taught him the difference between existing and living, between law and justice, between a house and a home. Whatever came next, they would face it together. No more hiding, no more shame, just truth, love, and the family they'd create in the light of day. The sun broke through the clouds as he spurred his horse faster, racing toward his real life at last. The summons came on a February morning, delivered by a nervous young deputy who couldn't meet Will's eyes. 3 weeks had passed since Will found Amaya in Esperanza. 3 weeks of rebuilding trust and planning a new life together. Now the past had caught up. "Former Deputy Fenner, you're required to appear before the Dry Willow Town Council. Mayor Hutchins insists on your immediate return." Amaya stood in the doorway of their rented room, Rose on her hip, fear flickering in her dark eyes. The baby, now 4 months old, reached for her father with chubby hands. "I don't have to go," Will said, though they both knew it was a lie. The paper was official, bearing the territorial judge's seal. "Yes, you do." Amaya's voice was steady. "We both do." The young deputy shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, the summons is only for—" "Where my husband goes, I go." She lifted her chin, every inch the proud woman Will had fallen in love with. "We hide from nothing anymore." The journey back to Dry Willow took 4 days. They rode in a small caravan. Will, Amaya with Rose, the deputy, and 2 escorts the town had sent to ensure their arrival. Each mile closer to the town tightened the knot in Will's stomach. They arrived at dusk, the familiar streets seeming foreign now. People stopped and stared as they passed. Women pulled their children inside, Men stood in doorways, hands hovering near weapons. The hatred was palpable, a living thing that followed their progress to the boarding house. "One room," the proprietress said coldly, keys clattering on the desk. "Town council meets tomorrow at 10. Don't be late." That night, Will and Amaya held each other in the narrow bed. Rose between them. Neither slept. When dawn broke gray and bitter, they dressed carefully. Will in his best suit, Amaya in the blue dress she'd worn for their wedding, Rose in a tiny white gown Clara had made. The town hall was packed, every seat filled, people standing along the walls. At the front, behind a raised table, sat the council, Mayor Hutchins, Reverend Blackwood, Banker Pratt, and 2 other prominent citizens. Sheriff Collins was notably absent, claiming illness. "William James Fenner," Hutchins began, gaveling for silence. "You stand accused of abandonment of duty, moral turpitude, and bringing shame upon this community. How do you answer?" Will stood, shoulders squared. "I answer that I followed my conscience, that I chose love over prejudice, truth over comfortable lies." "Pretty words," Blackwood sneered. "But the facts remain. You abandoned your lawful wife to consort with this. "Careful, Reverend," Will warned, his voice low and dangerous. "You took an oath when you pinned on that badge." Pratt interjected, "To uphold the law and moral standards of this community." "I took an oath to serve justice," Will countered. "Sometimes that means standing against the community when it's wrong." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Hutchins pounded his gavel. "You admit to unlawfully marrying this woman while still wed to Mrs. Whitman." "The divorce papers were filed, but not completed, making your arrangement both illegal and immoral." Hutchins gestured dismissively at Amaya. "This woman must leave town immediately. The child will be placed with a proper Christian family who can—" "No." Will's voice cut through the room like a blade. "I beg your pardon?" "I said no. Amaya is my wife in every way that matters. Rose is my daughter. Anyone who tries to separate us will answer to me." "Threats, Mr. Fenner." Blackwood stood, face flushed. "You forget. You have no badge now, no authority. I have something better. I have the truth." "The truth?" Hutchins laughed bitterly. "The truth is you've dishonored your race, your position, and your community. You've lain with a heathen and produced an abomination that—" The crack of Will's fist against Hutchins' jaw echoed through the hall. The mayor toppled backward as chaos erupted. Men surged forward, women screamed, and Rose began to cry. "Order! Order!" Pratt shouted, helping Hutchins to his feet. The mayor's lip was split, blood staining his white shirt. "Arrest him!" Hutchins sputtered, but before anyone could move, Amaya stood. The room fell silent. All eyes on the woman they'd condemned without knowing. "You speak of dishonor," she said, her accent thick with emotion but her words clear. "You who claim to follow Christ but show no love. You who preach family but would steal a child from her mother. Where is the honor in that? You have no right to speak here," Blackwood hissed. "I have every right. You judge me for my blood, but you know nothing of my heart. You call my daughter an abomination, but she is innocent love made flesh." Amaya's voice grew stronger. "I have harmed no one, stolen from no one. I have only loved a man who was brave enough to love me back." "Brave?" Margaret Whitman pushed through the crowd, perfectly dressed and coldly furious. "He's a fool who threw away everything for a momentary passion." "And what did you throw away?" Amaya turned to face her. "A husband who would have given you loyalty, kindness, respect. You wanted the badge, not the man. I want the man, not the position." Margaret's face contorted. "How dare you?" "I dare because I must. For my daughter. For all the daughters who will come after." Amaya addressed the room now. "You fear us because we are different. But difference is not evil. Love is not sin. And a child, any child, is a blessing." An unexpected voice rose from the back. "She's right." Everyone turned to see Tom Garrett standing on a bench. This woman helped me when my horse was lame. Asked nothing in return. She's got more Christian charity than half this room. Sit down, boy. Someone growled. But Tom continued. Deputy Fenner was the best lawman this town ever had. He tracked killers, stopped rustlers, kept the peace. Now you want to run him off because he fell in love? That ain't right. The boy speaks sense, said a gruff voice. Samuel Carter, the blacksmith, stepped forward. I've watched Will Fenner risk his life for this town more times than I can count. If he says this woman is worthy, that's enough for me. Samuel, Pratt looked scandalized. You can't mean... I mean what I say. Always have. Carter crossed his massive arms. Question is, what kind of town do we want to be? One that drives out good people, or one that judges folk by their actions? The crowd began to divide, arguments breaking out between neighbors. Hutchins pounded his gavel frantically. Enough! Enough! The council will decide. The hell you will. Sheriff Collins entered, leaning heavily on a cane but eyes fierce. I've kept quiet too long, watching this town tear itself apart with hate, but not anymore. Sheriff, you have no authority here. I have the authority of my office and my conscience. Collins limped to where Will stood. This man served with honor. His personal life is his own business. The law, Blackwood began. The law says nothing about who a man can love. Collins interrupted. As for the marriage issue, I've got something might interest you. He pulled out a paper. Telegram from Denver. The divorce was finalized 2 weeks before Will married Amaya. Clerical error in filing. He's free and clear. Stunned silence. Margaret went pale. Hutchins sank into his chair. Will felt Amaya's hand slip into his. Warm and solid. Real. So, Collins continued, seems to me we owe these folks an apology. And Will, if you want your badge back, it's yours. Will looked at the badge Collins held out, the star he'd worn with such pride. Then he looked at Amaya, at Rose, at the life they'd fought to claim. Thank you, Sheriff, but no. He addressed the room. I'm done trying to prove myself worthy of your acceptance. I know my worth. It's in the woman beside me and the child in her arms. We'll be leaving Dry Willow. Today. Collins started. It's all right. Jim, this town, it's not ready for us. Maybe someday, but not today. Will gathered his family close. We'll find somewhere that judges people by their hearts, not their blood. As they turned to leave, more voices rose in support. The banker's wife, the school teacher, the doctor's son. Not a majority, but enough to show the wind was changing. Outside, Hutchins caught up with them, his jaw already swelling. Fenner, wait. Will tensed, ready for more conflict. I was wrong, the mayor said quietly. My brother, he married a Cherokee woman years ago. Family disowned him. He died last winter, and I never made peace with him. He looked at Rose, something breaking in his eyes. Don't let pride steal your years, either of us. It wasn't an apology, not quite, but it was a crack in the wall. They left that afternoon, but not alone. Tom Garrett volunteered to drive their wagon. The blacksmith gave them tools, misses. Collins pressed preserves and blankets into Amaya's hands. Even some who'd stood silent in the hall slipped them money or supplies. As Dry Willow faded behind them, Will didn't look back. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also possibility. Beside him sat his wife, legally and morally, in her arms. Their daughter, legitimate in every way that mattered. Any regrets? Amaya asked softly. Will kissed her temple, then Rose's head, only that it took so long to stand up and be counted. And now we write our own story, together. The wagon rolled on, carrying them toward a future they'd choose for themselves, behind them. Dry Willow continued its struggle between old prejudice and new understanding. Change would come slowly, perhaps too slowly for some. But for Will and Amaya Fenner, the time for hiding was over. They faced the horizon with heads high, hearts united, and the unshakable knowledge that love, real love, was worth any price the world demanded. The gunshot shattered the midnight quiet, sending birds screeching from the pines. Will jolted awake, instinctively reaching for the rifle beside their bedroll. They'd made camp in a narrow canyon 20 miles south of Dry Willow, believing themselves safe. "Stay down," he whispered to Amaya, who clutched Rose tighter, the baby whimpering at the sudden movement. Hoofbeats thundered closer. Will counted at least 6 riders, maybe more. He'd chosen this spot for its defensive position, rock walls on 2 sides, thick brush covering their small camp. But against those numbers, Will Fenner. The voice belonged to Jake Thornton, whiskey-slurred but vicious. "We know you're in there. Time to pay for breaking the mayor's jaw." Will cursed silently. He'd thought Thornton would let it go, but wounded pride and liquor made a dangerous combination. "You've got no quarrel with the woman and child." Will called back. "Let them pass safely, and I'll come out." Harsh laughter echoed off the canyon walls. "The half-breed brat and her whore mother? They're the whole reason we're here." Amaya touched Will's arm. "I can take Rose up the rocks. There's a crevice." "No, we stay together." Will checked his ammunition. 6 shots in the rifle, 12 in his pistol. Not enough if they rushed all at once. Tom Garrett's voice carried from near their wagon. "Deputy, Will, I'm all right, but they jumped me. I'm sorry." "Shut up, boy." The sound of a fist hitting flesh made Will's jaw clench. "Here's how it's gonna be," Thornton continued. "You come out nice and peaceful-like. We take you back to town for a proper trial. The woman and brat, well, accidents happen on these mountain roads." "Go to hell, Thornton. Already been Dry Willow on a Sunday." More laughter from his companions. "Last chance. Fenner." Will looked at Amaya. Her face was pale but determined. Rose held secure in one arm, while her free hand gripped the small pistol he'd taught her to use. "I love you," he whispered. "Show me," she whispered back. "Keep us alive." The attack came from 3 sides. Will fired methodically, picking his targets, making each shot count. A man screamed and fell from his horse. Another cursed as Will's bullet took him in the shoulder, but there were too many. As Will reloaded, he heard Amaya gasp. One of Thornton's men had circled around, coming through the brush. She fired once, twice, the small pistol barking sharp in the night. The man stumbled back, clutching his leg. "The woman's armed!" someone shouted. "Then kill her too!" Thornton roared. Rage flooded Will's veins. He broke cover, moving like the predator he'd once been, hunting men who'd threatened what was his. His rifle spoke death, dropping another rider. His pistol cleared leather faster than thought, sending Thornton diving for cover. But in protecting his family, Will exposed himself. A bullet caught him high in the chest, spinning him around. Another grazed his ribs. He went down hard, blood spreading across his shirt. "Will!" Amaya's scream cut through the gunfire. "Stay back!" He struggled to rise, managed to get to one knee through blurring vision. He saw Thornton advancing, gun raised. "Should have stayed with your own kind. Fenner." The shot that rang out wasn't from Thornton's gun. The big man looked down in surprise at the spreading red stain on his chest, then toppled forward into the dirt. Sheriff Collins stepped from the shadows, smoking rifle in hand. Behind him, more riders appeared. Carter the blacksmith, the doctor's son, even banker Pratt's nephew, men from Dry Willow, but not the mob Will had feared. "Anyone else want to commit murder on my watch?" Collins' voice carried cold authority. "No? Then throw down your weapons. Now!" Thornton's remaining men complied hastily, hands raised as the townsmen surrounded them. Amaya was beside Will instantly, pressing cloth to his wounds. "Don't you dare," she said fiercely. "Don't you dare leave us. Not planning to," Will managed, though the world was graying at the edges. "Doctor," Marcus Harding pushed through the crowd. "Let me see." His examination was quick, professional. "Bullet's still in there, but it missed the lung. He'll live if we can stop the bleeding and prevent infection." As the doctor worked, Collins crouched beside them. Tom made it back to town, raised the alarm, said Thornton and his boys were planning something evil. He looked at Amaya with unexpected gentleness. "You all right, ma'am?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face as she held Will's hand. "What about the town?" Will asked weakly. "Won't be popular, you helping us?" Collins snorted. "Town can go hang. I took an oath to uphold the law, not mob rule. Besides..." He glanced at the men helping to secure Thornton's gang. You'd be surprised how many folks thought Thornton had this coming. They made a careful camp for the night. Guards posted while the doctor tended Will's wounds. Amaya never left his side. Rose sleeping fitfully in her arms. When dawn came, they loaded Will into the wagon for the journey, not back to Dry Willow, but forward to wherever they'd been heading. "I'll see these boys get what's coming to them," Collins promised. "Attempted murder, assault. They'll be lucky to see sunlight again." "Jim," Will caught his arm. "Why?" The sheriff was quiet for a moment. "Because 20 years ago, I loved a woman my family didn't approve of. Chinese girl, worked at the laundry. I let them drive her off, chose the easy path." His eyes were distant, full of old pain. "She died in San Francisco, alone. I've regretted it every day since." 2 days later, they reached the settlement of Cedar Ridge, a mining town that had seen enough different faces to barely blink at one more mixed family. The local sawmill needed an experienced foreman who could also handle security. It wasn't law work, but it was honest labor. They found a small house on the edge of town, with real glass windows and a view of mountains that touched the sky. As Will recovered, Amaya made it a home. Curtains at the windows, herbs growing by the door, roses cradled by the fireplace. The healing took weeks. Infection set in despite the doctor's care. And for 3 days Will burned with fever while Amaya fought death for him with poultices, prayers, and sheer determination. When the fever finally broke, he found her asleep in the chair beside their bed. Rose in her arms, both of them standing guard over him. "My angels," he whispered, making Amaya's eyes flutter open. "You're back," she breathed, touching his face as if to convince herself he was real. "Couldn't leave. You told me not to." Their first night together after his recovery was tender, careful of his still healing wounds. They moved together slowly, reacquainting themselves with each other's bodies, celebrating life and love and the future they'd nearly lost. When passion overtook caution, Amaya kissed his scars, the old one from Morrison's bullet that had brought them together, the new ones from defending their right to exist. "Battle marks," she murmured against his skin. "Worth every one," he replied, pulling her close. Cedar Ridge proved to be what Dry Willow couldn't, a place where they were judged by their actions, not their blood. Will's fair dealing at the mill earned respect. Amaya's skill with herbs and healing made her sought after when illness struck. Rose grew strong and laughing, toddling between parents who loved her fiercely. There were still challenges, the occasional sneer, the whispered slur, the turned back. But there were also friends, the mill workers who invited them to Sunday dinners, the school teacher who promised Rose would be welcome when the time came, the pastor who preached love over judgment. One evening, as spring painted the mountains gold, a letter arrived from Tom Garrett. Thornton's gang had been tried and imprisoned. The town was changing. Slowly, Sheriff Collins had hired a Mexican deputy, and the school was admitting children regardless of parentage. "Maybe someday you could come back." Tom wrote, "But I understand if that's not home anymore." Will showed the letter to Amaya as they sat on their porch, Rose playing at their feet. "Would you want to?" she asked. "Go back." Will looked at their daughter, at the woman who'd taught him courage, at the life they'd built from love and determination. "No," he said simply. "I'm already home." That night, they made love with the windows open to the mountain air, no longer hiding, no longer ashamed. In the darkness, Amaya whispered that she might be carrying their second child. Will's joy was so complete it brought tears. "Are you happy?" she asked, tracing patterns on his chest. "Happy doesn't cover it," he said. "I'm whole." They lay entwined, listening to the night sounds of their new town, their chosen home, somewhere in the distance. A church bell tolled the hour. Once, that sound from Dry Willow had called Will to duty, to conformity, to a life half-lived. Now it simply marked time's passage in a place where love wasn't measured by blood or skin, but by the choice to stand together against whatever came. The stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had watched over a desperate flight from prejudice. Now they witnessed something better, a family at peace, a love vindicated, a future bright with possibility. Will pulled Amaya closer, feeling Rose's small bed in the corner, hearing their daughter's soft breathing. His chest ached where the bullets had torn through. But it was a good ache, a reminder of what he'd almost lost and what he'd gained by choosing love over fear. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There would always be those who couldn't see past difference to find humanity. But tonight, in their mountain home, Will and Amaya Fenner had won something precious, the right to love freely, to raise their children in truth, to face the world as themselves. It was more than enough. It was everything. The rider appeared at dawn, dust-covered and official-looking, bearing the insignia of the Federal Marshal's Service. Will was loading timber at the mill when word reached him. His blood ran cold. The past had finally caught up. Marshal James Stockton was a tall man with graying temples and eyes that missed nothing. He waited in Will's small office, hat on the desk, badge gleaming in the morning light. "William Fenner," he said without preamble, "former deputy of Dry Willow." "That's right." Will kept his voice steady. "If this is about Thornton serving 10 years for attempted murder, this is about you." Stockton pulled out a sheaf of papers. "Seems there was quite a commotion when you left. Assault on a mayor, abandoning your post, taking the law into your own hands. I defended my family." "So I've heard." Stockton studied him carefully. "Thing is, Mayor Hutchins withdrew all charges, said it was a misunderstanding. Sheriff Collins backed him up. But once federal attention is drawn," he shrugged, "we have to investigate." Will's jaw tightened. "What do you want?" "The truth. Your side of things." Stockton leaned back. "And maybe your help." "My help?" "You know the territory between here and the border better than most. We've got a situation. Children going missing from Mexican settlements, taken north, sold to wealthy families wanting exotic servants. It's slavery by another name." Will felt sick. "How many?" "Dozen that we know of. Probably more." Stockton's eyes hardened. "Local law won't help. Some are likely involved. I need someone who knows the land, speaks the language, and won't turn a blind eye because the victims are Mexican. I have a family now. A job." "I know. Your wife, Amaya, isn't it? And a daughter." Stockton's voice gentled. "It's because you have a family that I'm asking. You know what it means to protect children who don't fit their narrow definitions." That evening, Will found Amaya in their small garden, Rose helping her gather herbs. The sight of them, his girls, safe and content, made his chest tight. How could he risk this peace they'd fought so hard to build? But later, as Amaya listened to Stockton's request, her face grew fierce. "Children stolen from their mothers?" She turned to Will. "You have to go. Amaya, no." She gripped his hands. "We know what it is to be separated, to have others decide we don't deserve our family. You must go." Stockton offered reassurance. "It's temporary, few weeks at most, and you'd be serving as a special deputy, federal authority, federal protection. And my family? Under federal protection as well. Anyone touches them, they answer to Washington." 3 days later, Will kissed his wife and daughter goodbye. Amaya pressed a small bundle into his hands, extra ammunition, dried meat, and her mother's silver cross. "To keep you safe," she whispered. "I'll come back." "You better. I'm carrying your son." Will froze. "You're—" She smiled through tears. "2 months along, so you must come back. Will Fenner. Our children need their father." The hunt for the child stealers led Will deep into territories he'd only heard about in whispers. Working with 2 other deputies, a taciturn Texan named Boyd, and a young idealist called Patterson. They followed rumors and fragments of truth through dusty border towns. In a cantina in Sonora, they found their first real lead. A drunk American bragging about easy money, about Mexican brats who'd be better off in civilization. Will's fist connected with the man's jaw before Boyd could stop him. "Easy, Fenner." Boyd drawled, "Dead men don't talk." But the violence loosened tongues. Names emerged. A network stretching from Tucson to Santa Fe, with buyers as far as San Francisco. Children taken from poor families, sometimes sold by desperate parents, often simply stolen. The trail led to a compound in the desert, heavily guarded, masquerading as a mission school. Will lay on a ridge, watching through field glasses as children worked in the courtyard. Thin, hollow-eyed, some no older than Rose. 20 guards, maybe more. Patterson whispered, "We need the army. Army's 3 days away." Boyd pointed out, "How many kids disappear in 3 days?" They attacked at dawn, when guards were changing shifts. Will had forgotten the clarity that came with righteous violence, the cold purpose that let him place bullets exactly where needed. Boyd worked the rifle, picking off sentries. Patterson, despite his youth, proved steady with a shotgun. The fighting was brutal but brief, faced with federal badges and deadly accuracy. Most guards surrendered. The few who didn't learned that Will Fenner had no mercy for those who traded in children. Inside, they found 19 children aged 4 to 12. Some had been there months, hope beaten out of them. A little girl, maybe 6, clutched a corn-husked doll and stared with eyes too old for her face. "It's all right," Will said in Spanish, kneeling before her. "We're taking you home." The girl studied him, then noticed the cross hanging from his neck. Amaya's mother's cross. Something shifted in her expression. "You're like us," she whispered. "Yes," Will said simply. "I am." The return of the children created a sensation. Families reunited, justice served, evil exposed. But Will found no satisfaction in the accolades. All he wanted was home. He returned to Cedar Ridge as autumn painted the mountains gold. Amaya met him at the door, rounder now, glowing with their growing child. Rose toddled forward on sturdy legs. "Papa! Papa, home!" Will swept them both into his arms, breathing in the scent of home, of love, of everything worth fighting for. That night, after Rose slept, they lay together carefully, mindful of Amaya's growing belly. Will told her about the children, about the compound, about the little girl with the corn-husked doll. "You gave them back their families," Amaya said softly. "I kept thinking about Rose, about you. What if—" "Shh." She kissed him quiet. "You did right. You always do right when you follow your heart." Later, as moonlight silvered their room, she guided his hand to her belly. "Feel." Movement under his palm. Their son. Strong and active. Will pressed his face to Amaya's stomach, whispering promises to the child within. "He'll be born free," Will said. "No one will ever question his right to exist, because his father made it so," Amaya murmured, running fingers through Will's hair. Marshal Stockton visited a week later with an offer, permanent position as a federal deputy marshal, working cases involving crimes against Mexican and Indian populations. "You'd be based here," Stockton explained. "Travel when needed, but Cedar Ridge would be home. Federal salary, federal protection, federal authority." Will looked at Amaya, saw her small nod. "I'll want Patterson as my partner." Will said, "Boy's got promise, and he doesn't care what color a victim is." "Done." Stockton extended his hand. "Welcome to the service, Deputy Marshal Fenner." That evening, Will polished a new badge, not the tarnished star of Dry Willow, but a federal shield that meant something more. Amaya watched from the doorway. "Does it feel different?" she asked. "Everything feels different," Will admitted. "I'm not the same man who rode out of Dry Willow wearing a badge." "No," she agreed, moving to stand beside him. "You're better. You're the man you were meant to be." Rose played at their feet, building towers with wooden blocks, knocking them down with delighted laughter. Soon there would be 2 children in this house, perhaps more in years to come. Children who would grow up seeing their father serve justice without prejudice, their mother respected for her healing skills, their family accepted for its love rather than judged for its blood. The fire crackled in the hearth. Outside, early snow began to fall. Will set aside the badge and pulled Amaya onto his lap, careful of her precious burden. Rose climbed up too, making a tangle of family. "Story, Papa?" Rose demanded. "What kind of story?" "About brave Papa and beautiful Mama." Will smiled, kissing the top of her dark head. "Once upon a time, there was a deputy who thought he knew about justice. Then he met a woman who taught him about love." As he spun the tale, their tale, sanitized for small ears, Amaya leaned against him, adding details, correcting his memory. Rose listened with rapt attention, not knowing she was hearing her own origin story. The legend of how love conquered fear. The badge sat on the table, catching firelight. Tomorrow it would mean duty, responsibility, danger. But tonight it was just metal, less important than the woman in his arms, the daughter at his feet, the son growing safe in the womb. Will Fenner had worn a badge before, but now, finally, he knew what it meant to truly serve and protect. Not just the law, but justice. Not just order, but what was right. And most of all, to protect the families that others would tear apart, because he knew the value of what he'd almost lost. The snow fell heavier, blanketing Cedar Ridge in white. But inside the Fenner house, all was warmth and light and love. A mixed-blood family that had faced the worst the world could offer and emerged stronger. Together, unashamed and unafraid. The courtroom in Dry Willow hadn't changed. Same pine benches, same high windows letting in harsh light, same smell of wood polish and judgment. But Will Fenner had changed. He entered wearing his federal marshal's badge, Amaya beside him in her best dress. Their children held close, Rose, now 3, and baby Gabriel, 6 months old in his mother's arms. The summons had been specific, testimony required in the federal investigation of civil rights violations. Will's old enemies would finally face justice. But first, he had to face them. Mayor Hutchins sat in the defendant's chair, somehow smaller than Will remembered. Beside him, Reverend Blackwood clutched his Bible like a shield. They weren't the only ones. Half the town council faced federal charges for conspiracy to violate constitutional rights, interference with federal officers, and organized intimidation. "Deputy Marshal Fenner," the federal prosecutor began, "please tell the court about the events of December 1886. Will spoke clearly, without emotion, recounting the attempted forced separation of his family, the threats, the mob justice that had driven them from town. His voice carried through the packed courtroom where faces from his past watched, some hostile, some ashamed, a few openly supportive. They came at night. Will testified. Armed men, led by Jake Thornton with the explicit support of town officials. Their stated intent was to murder my wife and steal our child. Objection. Blackwood's lawyer stood. Inflammatory language. Overruled. Judge Harrison said coldly, "Continue, Marshal." As Will spoke, he caught sight of familiar faces. Tom Garrett sat in the back, now a grown man, nodding encouragement. Sheriff Collins, retired but present, gave him a small salute, and surprisingly, Margaret, his former wife, sat alone, her face unreadable. When Amaya took the stand, the courtroom grew restless. Some hadn't expected her to speak, a Mexican woman, testifying against white town leaders. But she spoke with quiet dignity about the isolation, the fear, the nights spent wondering if they'd survive until morning. "I asked only to love my husband and raise our children," she said. "For this, they called me names I won't repeat. They threatened our baby. They tried to destroy us because we were different. And yet you're here," the prosecutor noted. "You survived. We survived because my husband chose love over fear. Because some people," she looked at Collins, at Tom, at others who'd helped, chose justice over prejudice. But we shouldn't have had to run. No family should. The defense was brutal in cross-examination, trying to paint Amaya as a seductress who'd corrupted a good lawman. But she weathered every attack with grace that made their cruelty more apparent. You married him knowing the town wouldn't approve. The defense lawyer pressed. I married him because we loved each other. Since when is love a crime? When it violates the natural order? The natural order? Amaya's voice rose. Tell me, sir, what's natural about hate? What's natural about stealing children from their mothers? What's natural about men with guns coming in darkness? Rose, sensing her mother's distress, began to fuss. Without hesitation, Amaya lifted her daughter onto her lap, soothing her in Spanish. The sight, a mother comforting her child, was so simple, so universal, that several jury members visibly softened. Hutchins took the stand in his own defense, but his bluster had faded. Under federal questioning, he admitted to knowing about Thornton's plans, to encouraging community action against the Fenners. We were protecting our town's values, he insisted. By attempting murder? Judge Harrison's voice was sharp. By maintaining standards. You don't understand what it's like, having them among us. Them? The judge leaned forward. You mean American citizens? Legal residents? A federal officer and his lawfully wedded wife? The trial lasted 3 days. Will and Amaya stayed at the boarding house, the same one where Tom Garrett had once lived. The proprietress, Mrs. Murphy, who'd once refused them a room, now couldn't do enough to make them comfortable. Times change, she said quietly, bouncing Gabriel on her knee while Rose played with her cat. Some of us change with them. On the final day, Margaret approached them outside the courthouse. Will, she nodded stiffly to Amaya. Mrs. Fenner. Margaret. She stood awkwardly, then spoke in a rush. I was wrong. About everything. I wanted the status of being a deputy's wife. But you wanted an actual wife. A family. She looked at the children. They're beautiful. Thank you, Amaya said simply. Margaret turned to go, then paused. I'm leaving Dry Willow, starting over in California. I hope you find happiness. We have, Will said, taking Amaya's hand. We hope you find yours. The verdict came down like thunder, guilty on all counts. Hutchins, Blackwood, and 3 others would serve federal prison time. More importantly, Dry Willow would be under federal oversight to ensure civil rights compliance as they prepared to leave. Sheriff Collins approached. Will, I know you've got your federal job now, but Dry Willow needs a new sheriff, someone who understands justice for all people. Will looked at Amaya, saw her small shake of the head. I appreciate the offer. Jim. But our home is in Cedar Ridge now. Can't blame a man for trying. Collins smiled sadly. This town lost something when it drove you out. Maybe we're finally learning what. The journey home was different from their flight years ago. Now they traveled openly, federal protection ensuring safe passage. At each stop, people saw what they chose to see. Some a mixed family that offended their sensibilities, others simply parents traveling with children. In Cedar Ridge, the community welcomed them back with a celebration. Will's work as a federal marshal had brought recognition to their small town, and Amaya's healing skills had saved enough lives that few cared about her origins anymore. That night, in their home with its real glass windows and views of endless mountains, Will and Amaya put their children to bed. Gabriel slept immediately, but Rose wanted her favorite story. Tell about when Papa saved the children, she demanded. Another night, Will said. Tonight, let me tell you about brave people who stood up for what's right, even when it was hard. Later, with the children asleep, Will and Amaya sat on their porch, watching stars wheel overhead. The badge lay on the table between them, not a symbol of division anymore, but of protection for all families, regardless of blood. Do you think things will really change? Amaya asked. In places like Dry Willow? Slowly, Will admitted. But they convicted Hutchins. They're forcing change. It's a start. Our children won't have to hide. No, they'll face other challenges. But not that, not anymore. Amaya leaned into him, and they sat in comfortable silence. Inside, their children slept peacefully. Tomorrow would bring new duties, new challenges. Will had 3 federal cases waiting, all involving crimes against Mexican and Indian families. The work was hard, dangerous, often heartbreaking. But tonight, he was simply a man on a porch with his wife, in a home they'd built with love and determination. The stars above were the same ones that had witnessed their secret marriage, their desperate flight, their fight for survival. Now they witnessed something better, a family at peace, living openly, proud of who they were. "I love you," Amaya whispered. "And I love you," Will replied, pulling her closer, forever and always, no matter what the world says. A coyote howled in the distance, answered by another. Once, that sound had meant loneliness, danger, isolation. Now it was simply part of the night music of their chosen home, no more threatening than the wind in the pines or the creek babbling behind their house. They'd won. Not just the trial, not just the right to exist, but something more precious. The right to love without shame, to raise their children in truth, to face each day as themselves. It had cost them nearly everything, but what they'd gained was worth any price. As they finally went inside, Will paused at the door, looking back at the star-filled sky. Somewhere out there were other families hiding, other loves deemed unacceptable, other children told they didn't belong. His badge meant he could help them now, could stand between them and the darkness. "Coming to bed?" Amaya called softly. "Coming," he answered, closing the door on the night. In their bedroom, they came together with the easy intimacy of years, bodies finding familiar rhythms, love expressed in touch and whisper, and the simple miracle of being together. Outside, the world still held prejudice and hate, but inside these walls, love had built a fortress that no amount of ignorance could breach. Later, as Amaya slept curved against him, Will thought about the journey that had brought them here. From a wounded lawman in a border town to a federal marshal with a family others had tried to destroy. Every scar had been worth it. Every tear, every fear, every desperate night had led to this. Wholeness, completion, home. The future stretched ahead, bright with possibility. Rose would start school soon, would face questions about her heritage with the strength her parents had given her. Gabriel would grow up in a world slightly more accepting than the one his parents had fought. There might be more children. God willing, each one a bridge between worlds, proof that love recognized no boundaries, and Will and Amaya would grow old together, their love deepening with each passing year, their story becoming legend in the territories. The deputy who chose love over law, the woman who taught him courage, the family that refused to be broken. The badge would continue to shine, protecting those who needed protection. But it would never shine brighter than the love that had redeemed it, transformed it from a symbol of division into one of unity. Justice, Will had learned, wasn't about maintaining order. It was about protecting the vulnerable, standing for the right, choosing love over fear. And love was the greatest justice of all. Thank you for listening to this story of love, courage, and justice in the Old West. Where are you enjoying this tale from? Please comment below and let us know your location so we can connect with listeners around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Will and Amaya's journey. Your comments and support mean everything to us.